Good evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sarah Zenaida Gould, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute. Welcome to tonight's MACRI Talk. Today, we are joined by Dr. Tiffany Gonzalez, a historian whose work explores Mexican American women, or Chicanas, in electoral politics. She's currently a fellow at the Clement Center at Southern Methodist University, and she's also an assistant professor at James Madison University, where she teaches courses on Latinx history, social movements, and women in politics. She's working on a manuscript titled Representation of Change: How Chicanas Reshaped the American Political Process in the Late 20th Century, which examined Chicanas' contributions to changing Texas politics and the second wave feminist movement. She's also working on another project on Texas Representative Irma Rangel. Welcome, Dr. Gonzalez. And before we get started, I do just want to say one thing, and that is thank you to AARP for sponsoring tonight's talk. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Gonzalez.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Saying thank you to you and those in the audience listening for the invitation to be present with me to talk a little bit about some of the writing I've been working on over the years. And this presentation that I'm giving today really stems from a piece that I wrote from an anthology that is originally titled Breaking Barriers for Inclusion, Women Running for Public Office in the Chicano and Chicana Civil Rights Movement in Texas. And the stories I want to tell in this presentation that I seek to tell might resonate with many of you who are perhaps part of the movement era or have heard of these women that were part of the movement and their important work that they've done. Just this past weekend, I attended the Raza Unida Party 50th reunion, which was kind of amazing for me as someone that wasn't part of this movement era and also doesn't have familial connections, that is more a little bit of an outsider, but learning about it and to be in that lovely space was something quite magical. And as a historian, I sat there listening to the movement activists telling the public about their experiences and fond memories and thoughts about the future of where the movement was quite powerful, not only in thinking about, the possibilities of what Mexican American Latino Chicanos can do in Texas and across the nation, but also how much work we still have done to do to change. And honestly, these histories and stories are so important to me because I remain so mesmerized of the work that Chicanas have done to expand the meaning of the democratic process for themselves and others. So I'm thankful to serve as an interpreter of these stories for you all today. And allow me to begin. This is a new stream for me, so let me press my presentation to start. So beginning with Trump's election in 2016 really created a backlash that resulted in an increase of women and people of color, women of color, announcing the run for local, state, and federal government under the Democratic Party. And due to the political climate, more Latinas are running for public office on the Democratic ticket as a way to invoke change and represent the people in their district and the community in a way that they feel that need to be represented. So for the 2018 midterm elections that I write about, or what I wrote about in the anthology, right, in Texas, former Dallas County Sheriff Lupe Valdez campaigned for the current Texas governor seat, which Greg Abbott currently holds. Former El Paso County Judge Veronica Escobar replaced Representative Beto O'Rourke in the 16th Congressional District seat. Samantha Carrillo Fields of Lubbock ran for the Texas House District 84 against John Frullo, a Republican, and Selena Vasquez of Bryan won her election for Justice of the Peace for Precinct 4. Pictured here, I present two pictures of two Latinas who are currently in public office at the federal level. Here we have Veronica Escobar, who I mentioned, but also Sylvia Garcia out of Houston. And here I'm presenting some newspaper clippings that were highlighted during the 28 midterm elections, such as the wave of women crashes Texas primaries. You can see a picture of Sylvia Garcia. One from NPR, the women's wave, backlash to Trump persist, reshaping politics in 2018. One from Times Magazine that's on the upper top portion of the screen is a year ago, they marched. Now a record number of women are running for public office.
I'm sorry to interrupt. It looks like we're still on slide 1. Oh, there you go. There you go. Perfect.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm so
Okay.
sorry.
There we go.
That's so awkward. Okay, sorry everybody. Hopefully y'all can see that okay. Okay. So this is what the slide 2 that I was speaking about, and how newspaper articles went in the mainstream, the public and social media went through announcing the 2018 midterm elections, and from Time Magazine, from NPR, in Texas. And on this slide, we have U.S. Representative Sylvia Garcia. You can see she served as a delegate for the International Women's Year meeting in 1977. And she has such a fascinating backstory with the women's movement, but her story is often overlooked. It's only until recently, with her speaking on to the 1977 project that she's part of, and in conversation that she has with the public, and commemorating her work that she did in the 1970s for women's rights. And now, of course, she serves as a U.S. representative for the 29th Congressional District in Texas, representing much of eastern portion of Houston. So with this all said, this is really a glimpse to the political intention occurring to increase Latinas campaigning for public office in order to transform politics and public policy across the nation, and not just in Texas. And although it comes as to a surprise, Texas does have a longer history of Latinas running and winning seats to serve as public officials in government. And these histories of Latinas who run for public office illustrate the centrality of Chicanas in Texas politics and the Chicano movement throughout the 20th century. And as I argue within my work, is that one cannot study Texas politics or national electoral politics without recognizing that Mexican American women have shaped politics, public policy, and the meaning of representation in government. And much what that has already been written, and revisiting that literature that examines Texas politics, examines it through the city or state employees, council members, mayors, or state representatives. Chicanas are often missing or in the sideline in this historical narrative. In addition, the history of Chicanas in electoral politics and in government goes unrecognized within accounts of the Chicano movement. And this historical amnesia, as I say, is also reflected in accounts beyond the local and state levels. So one example that I focus on begins with La Raza Unida Party. So throughout the 20th century, what I show in my work, of course, is that that in Texas, the white male political machine dominated the Democratic Party. It's a one-party state, which resulted in the platform to not benefit Latinos at the time. So Chicanos in South Texas banded together to create an alternative mechanism to combat racial discrimination and to create policy change at the local and state level in the 1970s. The reformation of the Raza Unida Party sought Chicano self-determination through electoral politics and the expansion of civil rights. It challenged the Democratic Party in Texas by expanding in counties across the state, from El Paso, Lubbock, San Angelo, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, and into the Valley of Texas. Many women Chicanas involved in the Raza Unida Party pushed for the recognition of the party at state and national organizations. They organized conferences, maintained membership, campaigned, and created alliances. The party provided Chicanas an opening to engage in party politics and organize more people in Texas. As Marta Cortera, an Raza Unida co-founder, noted, and I quote, "The important people were the organizers, and the organizers were very often women, but they were not necessarily the ones running for office, and we needed them to run. We needed them because very often they had no jobs that were threatened, or they had no jobs. So they weren't threatened economically. They weren't vulnerable to that extent," end quote. So to an extent, Raza Unida Party did offer Chicanas a way to participate more directly with the political process by running for public office. But this was often because of practicality. But nonetheless, Chicanas challenged gender discrimination and also enhanced women's consciousness in party politics and feminism. To recruit women into the political process, Chicanas formed Mujeres por la Raza, which focused on raising women's political consciousness to make them more active in the party and run for political positions within the party structure. As Edie Chapa, a member of the Raza Unida Party, contended that Chicanas often lacked the sophistication that was required by, and I quote, confusing and misleading election laws and by the movidas, which are pre-planned political motives of the two other parties against our people, end quote. Therefore, I say that women found ways to teach one another about the political process and work within their cultural knowledge to navigate local politics. Chicanas established social networks for the advancement of political autonomy, civil rights, and inclusion within electoral politics in Texas. The women played a vital role in recruiting and empowering other women to engage in party politics. Women such as Virginia Musquiz, I have pictured here to the right, upper right, Marta Cortera, Rosie Castro, Ima Mireles, Maria Elena Martinez, and Alma Canales were among the many Chicanas who either ran for public office or served as critical leaders within the party. In Crystal City, Virginia Musquiz was well respected in the community due to her commitment to the political advancement of Chicanos. She had participated in PASO, which stands for the Political Association of Spanish-Speaking Organization in Texas. In 1964, she became the first Chicana to run for the Texas State Legislature for District 34. And the following year, she ran for a seat on the Crystal City Council. Although losing both races, Musquiz ran a successful campaign for Zavala County clerk seat under La Raza Unida Party banner in 74, and she was the first Tejana elected in Zavala County. Marta Cortera, whose campaign ad I have on the lower right, she is a Chicana feminist and a co-founder of La Raza Unida Party, and she ran for State Board of Education for District 23 in 1972. Aside from her participation, she also labored in civic organizations such as the National Women's Political Caucus and the Texas Women's Political Caucus, the Mexican American Business and Professional Women's Association, and held an active role in local and national politics, even beyond La Raza Unida Party. Often missing within writings of the Chicano movement persists to the actual labor women engaged in outside of organizational politics. Cortera has expertise in library and information services, which led to her work to the Texas State Library, University of Texas, Juarez Lincoln Center, the Memorial Library in Austin, Texas. She published in 1976 Dios y Hembra, which serves as the first book to document Chicana feminist action and history. Also wrote Feminism, Chicana and Anglo Versions, a historical analysis, the profile of Mexican American women. And Cortera's feminist causes and speeches and publications, as well as her work in recovering Chicana history as a librarian, earned her a good, strong reputation for her work, not just in movement circles, but across the state and across the country. In San Antonio, Rosie Castro, a co-founder of San Antonio's Raza Unida Party, ran for a seat in San Antonio City Council in 1971. Now, although Castro was unsuccessful with her bid, she held on to her activist commitment, was strongly involved in the Raza Unida Party, and her own sons. In an oral history conducted by Jose Angel Gutierrez, Castro reflected on one of her major impacts of the Raza Unida Party had in Texas, and I quote, "We had opened up the process more to make it more inclusive. We forced the public policy issues and formed some resources that had never been before," end quote. Her two sons, Julian and Joaquin Castro, have carried on the legacy of social activism and civil rights activism in their own work within the Democratic Party as politicians. In 2001, Julian Castro was elected to San Antonio City Council, acted as mayor of San Antonio from 2009 to 2014, and also served as the United States Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under President Barack Obama from 2014 and 2017. In January 2019, Julian announced his run for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States. In 2013, Joaquin Castro was elected to serve as United States House of Representatives for Texas 20th Congressional District. So, of course, this is a reflection of another way of how the legacy of the movement continues on beyond the movement pardon me, that travels on even to the children and those influenced by the activists themselves. So undeniably, I say that the work that Chicanas conducted in RUP created a pathway for more, some way creating more knowledge about the importance of community activism and politics, but also planted a seed to influence Chicanas and by and large Latinas to engage with party politics more directly. So women that were involved in La Raza Unida Party, some of them pushed for greater visibility and joined feminist organizations, part of the women's movement, such as the National Women's Political Caucus and the Texas Women's Political Caucus, that enabled them to stretch influence and create broader networks to share information with other women and maximize their visibility and their ability for fight for civil rights. So I'm going to turn my attention now to talk a little bit about the National Women's Political Caucus. In 1971, the National Women's Political Caucus was formed as a multi-partisan organization to fight for the Equal Rights Amendment and to train women to get involved in the democratic process, have them run for public office and be more active participants during this women's movement. Betty Friedan, co-founder of the National Women's Political Caucus, wrote, I quote, "Women have done the political housework in both parties. They have been ignored by the very men they have elected. They know what we need in women's movement. They have learned what we've tried to get a priority, money appropriated, or even legislation enforced on issues like child care, abortion, or sex discrimination. What we need is political power for ourselves," end quote. Here I have a picture from a newspaper clipping from the first meeting in Washington, D.C. in 1971, that summer. And you can see here it's Gloria Steinem, from left to right, Gloria Steinem, Bella Abzug, mispronunciation, standing up with her hat. Sitting down is also Shirley Chisholm, and next to Shirley Chisholm is Betty Friedan. Betty Friedan herself had gained national reputation for her own feminist mystique, and some historians and scholars might have dubbed her as her work opening up the women's movement, but those of us that study women of color in the movement know that that's very different story. Following the establishment of the National Women's Political Caucus, Texas women pushed for the formation of a local one, a state one, such as the Texas Women's Political Caucus, a state-affiliated caucus that supported women running for public office through grassroots efforts. When the Texas Women's Political Caucus formed in 1971, only 2 women served in the Texas state legislature. That was Senator Barbara Jordan and Representative Sissy Farenthold, but there was no Latinas. Considering that men dominated party politics at a more broader level outside, Latinas face several disadvantages when running for public office, and that includes credibility, campaign funds, and networks. Being perceived as unqualified, women struggled to gain credibility due to societal perceptions, lacking professional connections, and familial responsibilities. Women also faced struggles that impeded their success in party politics. In addition, political parties overlooked women at this time for public office, and some women lacked the confidence to actually take the plunge to run for public office. To challenge the man's world of politics, women in the National Women's Political Caucus and affiliated state and local chapters shared networks, provided financial support, taught campaign and fundraising skills to elevate women's self-confidence. And in my work, the National Women's Political Caucus and the state caucus, the Texas Women, are so very important to illustrate how not only Chicanas got involved with the larger women's movement and the issues that came about with that, but how they translated their skills, right, to recruit more Chicanas, Latinas to get involved with this political process. The fall in November 1971, from that summer of 1971, the State Women's Political Caucus is formed. They held their first organizing conference in Austin, Texas. Liz Carpenter, co-founder of the National Women's Political Caucus and proponent of Equal Rights Amendment, gave the keynote address and urged the audience to recognize the political limitations that women faced within American politics. And she said, and I quote, "It's time to end discrimination and encourage women to run for the legislature, the Senate, mayor, Congress, and local positions, end quote. As a Texan, Liz Carpenter was no stranger to the good old boy network in Texas politics. Her stance for promoting women to public office derived from her awareness of party politics. Years of working in Washington, she had been active with the Democratic Party, worked as President Johnson's administrative assistant when he was vice president, and later acted as Lady Bird Johnson's press secretary when Johnson assumed presidency. The knowledge she gained about party politics furthered her stance toward advancing women in public life. So Chicanas, who were involved in the last Unidad Party, charted their own path within the Texas Women's Political Caucus as a way to push for reform, to fight for the ERA, but also to make sure that their needs were included in the women's movement and to participate within the larger political structure of the state being the Texas. Similar to the National Women's Political Caucus, state of Texas focused on training and recruiting women to run for public office. Chicanas joined because it allowed them to enhance their rights and political power. But it's important to underline, as I see in my work, that when Chicanas joined the women's movement through the Texas Women's Political Caucus or the National Women's Political Caucus, Chicanas came in with their own understanding and their own skill sets of organizational development and knowledge of how to work within movements. This was not something that the white women's movement taught them. They already knew. They were joining to make sure, right? They had to build their networks. They knew what was going on within the women's movement, so they can share that information back to their communities. So when the first meeting was held, it focused on creating a future action plan, and workshops that were slated for that event consist of women's priorities, future structure of the Texas Women's Political Caucus, political procedures and strategy, and organizing at the local level. Among the women assigned to lead a conference workshop was Alma Canales, who represented La Unidad Party. There at this first meeting of the Texas Women's Political Caucus, Chicanas presented a report to make the women of the caucus aware of their stance for entering the Texas Women's Political Caucus. And in the report, it says, they asked for endorsement by the Texas Women's Party for minority political parties such as La Unidad Party as an affirmative action on behalf of women who that minorities have no other avenue for seeking participation in the political structure of the state, because racism is such a monumental obstacle for Chicanos and other minorities. In Texas, women of La Unidad cannot have the luxury of dealing exclusively with feminism and fighting male chauvinism. Women struggling for women's rights know full well the burden of second-class citizenship and other injustices perpetuated by the Texas political havoc, end quote. Due to exclusion from the party structure in Texas, as I've said, Chicana participation in the caucus allowed them to bring awareness to white women also about the lack of representation they face due to sexism, racism, and classism. By funneling their civil rights activism within the caucus, Chicanas expanded their network and fight. Fortunately, women still compose the majority of the membership in the second wave feminist organizations, and the National Women's Political Caucus and the Texas Women's Political Caucus would be no different, but Chicanas would still remain in there to fight in some way until later on. At a 1972 Texas Women's Political Caucus meeting in Mesquite, Texas, near Dallas, the caucus had adopted 46 resolutions, which included the endorsement of State Representative Sissy Farenthold for governor and Alma Canales for lieutenant governor under La Unidad Party. Both Farenthold and Canales were eventually defeated, although Chicanas were upset with Farenthold because of her lack of assistance to Canales while she ran for lieutenant governor seat. Chicanas remained in the caucus and continued to strategize for greater visibility, but the tensions that developed between the women were rooted in different cultural and value systems that shaped really their ideologies for practicing and engaging in politics. For Chicanas, a system based on respect and honoring one's word informed their ideologies for engaging in political processes, and Farenthold's lack of support to Canales was one example of the many incidents that Chicanas experienced while involved in the National Women's Political Caucus and the Texas Women's Political Caucus. A year later, In February 1973, at the National Women's Political Caucus first convention in Houston, Texas, the membership created elected positions for chairperson, treasurer, and secretary to supervise the ongoing efforts within the National Caucus. New officers included Democrat Francis Farenthold as chair, Republican Audrey Rowe Colon, Bobby Kilberg, and Ray Mujica Hammer of the Raza Unida Party. And the last three women served as vice chair. Upon Farenthold's election to chairperson, she pledged to bring change in society and assist in the goal of more women elected to public office across the nation. Yet, upon Farenthold's election, Chicana delegates from La Raza Unida Party challenged Farenthold's commitment in helping them recruit more members. Farenthold responded, I quote, "Every group in this body has my commitment," end quote. The newspapers reported that Chicanas, and I quote, "stirred up a ruckus with a controversial proposal they pushed through during a marathon business session, which stretched from 7 p.m. Saturday until 3:35 a.m. Sunday," end quote. In pressing for more visibility in the National Women's Political Caucus, Chicanas submitted resolutions that focused on Chicana issues and concerns. Among the resolutions was the call for the caucus to endorse Raza Unida Party inclusion as an official in its official and promotional material, which also in this official promotional material had cited Democratic Party and Republican parties. The following resolutions focused on the establishment of a Chicana caucus to prioritize Chicana experience, the endorsement of the National Chicana Welfare Rights Organization, calling for support for the fair boycott, and the farm workers lettuce boycott, Chicana educational opportunities, and the Chicana Policy Council members. The Chicana resolutions demonstrated that the National Women's Political Caucus needed to take into account the unique experiences that Chicanas faced in society in the realm of labor, welfare, education, as well as to recognize if the caucus wanted a united front, as the caucus was promoting united front and leadership, that it must include Chicanas dances within its structures. The question about whether Farenthold or the National Women's Political Caucus supported Chicanas really loomed largely at the convention and thereafter. At this first convention, Cortera writes, recorded that among the crowd were over 100 Chicanas. Among them was Ray Mujica Hammer, who had just been elected as vice chair, Alicia Escalante, Lupe Anguiano, Maria Cárdenas, Ivy Chapa, and Lydia Serra, as well as two white women, Jeanette Lezcano and Sally Andrade, who helped Chicanas maneuver discussions on the floor. The women mentioned were leaders working to improve the Chicano movement, the Chicano community, in their hometowns. For example, Rosie Bermudez has studied Alicia Escalante's work in the East Los Angeles Welfare Rights Movement, an organization focused on assisting welfare recipients to be treated with respect and dignity by welfare administration. Escalante, who was part of the Chicanas that were there at the first convention in Houston, advocated on behalf of Chicanas and Mexican single mothers for economic and social justice from the welfare system that discriminated against them. Escalante attended the National Women's Political Caucus convention and made sure that the attendees recognized that within the realm of political issues lay economic justice for Chicanas, and such that economic issue was a women's issue. And as a result, Chicanas called for the endorsement of the National Chicana Welfare Rights Organization. This cross-regional collaboration that the Chicanas created proved beneficial for building networks for social power, as well as to advance their movement for political power. After the convention in Houston, Chicanas and La Raza Unida Party remained hesitant and even questioned whether to stay within the state level caucus, the Texas one. At La Raza Unida Party convention in San Antonio in December 1973, the women tabled a motion to stay or withdraw from the Texas Women's Political Caucus. A report from the San Antonio Raza Unida Party meeting documented the discussion. And I quote, another report was given citing an incident of why it was not to our advantage to belong to the Texas Women's Political Caucus. They pointed back to the incident that happened with when the Texas Women's Political Caucus had not endorsed Alma Canales, who at the time was running for lieutenant governor, but in reality did little to help in Alma's campaign. And this report also talked about Chicanas had asked for a separate caucus during the National Women's Political Caucus in Houston, but the petition was passed and granted, but with little or no effect in the National Women's Political Caucus, leaving Chicanas still at 1% at the bottom of the pyramid. So these tensions and these recollections that Chicanas are having with this National Women's Political Caucus and the Texas Women's Political Caucus, really, as I say in this chapter that I wrote, centered on patriarchal liberal feminism that white women continued to espouse. Chicanas came into this broader caucus of the women's movement, explaining that the roots for intersectional political disenfranchisement rested on sexism, racism, classism, and that the triple oppression that Chicanas experienced led them to work for political reform and electoral politics by organizing not just in the National Unity Party, but also in the Texas Women's and the National Women's Political Caucus. And as historian Maylee Blackwell refers to in her work, Chicanas worked double-time activism and not against the Chicano movement. In November 9th, 1975, the Lyndon B. Johnson Library and the School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin sponsored a 3-day conference to discuss the ways in which women were perceived in the media, government, overall society. The meeting resulted from the International Women's Year meeting in Mexico that happened earlier that summer. And due to Chicanas having a large number of women active in public life, Liz Carpenter, the coordinator of the conference committee, believed that the meeting offered an opportunity for continued connection between the grassroots, national, and international leaders. The workshop panel and sessions range from exploring the gains and gaps of women power structure in Texas. Pardon me, let me take a drink real quick. To beating the old boys game, another panel workshop titled Don't Wait to Be Asked, to the gains and gaps of the rest of us. Under the gains and gaps of the rest of us workshop, Alicia Chacon, a Mexican-American city clerk from El Paso, Texas, spoke to the effects that coalition building had on electoral politics. At the intersection of the Chicano movement, Chacon made headway in local and state politics. She had been active in the Democratic Party, the Texas Women's Political Caucus, and in local civic organizations in El Paso. In 1974, not 54, she became the first woman to serve as county official and therefore marked a significant transformation for women in government in El Paso. For Chacon, drawing from oral responses of when she won for public office, she says that representation signified how society views women in public and its evolution of it. Under the same panel that Chacon was presenting on, that was the Gains and Gaps Texas, and for the rest of us, Marta Cortera was also presented under this same session. When Cortera gave her presentation at the Women in Public Life conference, she directed her testimony and her speech to give a broader awareness to the limitations that Chicanas faced in public life. Cortera started her speech by noting that she would not be regulated to 10 minutes as she started her presentation, and went on to say, and I quote, "On a nationwide basis, Chicanas have no representative in the Women in Power Committee, no U.S. Senator, no U.S. Representative, no federal judges, no high federal administrative position, and at the state level in Texas, we have no state senator, no state representative, no judges, no mayors, and one Chicana in state commission," end quote. Her speech, quite powerful, and this is just a little bit of it, quite powerful, given in her announcing, right, the limitations of where Chicanas stand in the political structure and in political power. She showed a comparison, really, and highlighted this comparison to white women in the meaning of changing of representation in government. If the conference itself lacked Chicana representation, and representation in government meant changing public policies to reflect cultural preservation, women's rights, and self-determination, and resources to remedy inequity and recognition of economic and social power. Things changed at this conference, at this Women in Public Life conference, when Pauline Martinez met Irma Rangel while discussing the lack of Mexican American women in politics at the conference for Women in Public Life. It was there that Pauline recruited Rangel to run for public office, and Rangel's win later brought forward changes to education, welfare programs, and assistance to the poor in electoral politics. To give more context, so I feel like I just rushed through Pauline. Pauline Martinez was part of she's from, at that time, was in San Antonio and was quite involved in the Texas Women's Political Caucus. She served as chair of the legislative committee, if I believe. So it was part of her job within the Texas Women's Political Caucus to recruit women, especially in her eye, to recruit Chicanas to run for public office. When Rangel first met Pauline Martinez, Rangel had been working as an attorney in her hometown of Kingsville, Texas. Before becoming an attorney, Rangel had earned her bachelor's degree from Texas A&I University, which is now Texas A&M Kingsville, and taught in South Texas, California, and Venezuela. Rangel even published a guidebook for teaching elementary students to speak Spanish. Rangel's passion for public service and improving her community led her to pursue law school. And in 1966, she enrolled in St. Mary's Law School in San Antonio. She graduated with her law degree in 1969, and after graduation from law school, she worked as a law clerk for Judge Adrian Spears, and then moved to Corpus Christi to work as an assistant district attorney. Rangel, like the few other Mexican American women lawyers at the time, faced hurdles of acceptance in the courtroom in Crystal City. Rangel's experience, due to perhaps they believed that her lack of credibility from colleagues. She was also the first Mexican American district attorney in the area. She eventually moved from Corpus Christi and returned home 2 years later after moving to Corpus Christi, and worked as a partner for a law firm with Hector Garcia. Her involvement there, moving home to Kingsville, really is what then threw her into local party politics. Her family had been highly involved in the Kleberg County and Kingsville with local politics, but it wasn't until she moved home that she really dipped her toes into it. She became and ran for Kleberg County Democratic Party chairperson in 1974. She ran and won her election. Her activity in local politics gave her insight into the issues of her hometown, of her county, and what the constituencies were experiencing. So when she attended the Women in Public Life conference, that she knew why it was so important for women, not just women, but for Chicanas, Mexican American women, to be involved. And as Rangel remembered, and I quote from her oral history, she gives a lot of credibility, and quote, "These same women were also the members of the Texas Women's Political Caucus, and that was the Mexican American caucus of the Texas Women's Political Caucus." And so Pauline would come down from San Antonio, and they would kept on encouraging me to run, and then I decided to discuss it with my mother and father, and they said, "Well, why not?" So I went ahead and took the chance on running, end quote. As I've said, the Mexican American women, especially Pauline, encouraged Rangel to run for state representative. In her campaign, her slogan was "Representation for a Change," which brought a challenge that indicated that a woman with educational qualifications who also had political experience would change Kleberg County's political climate and government. She being Rangel, disrupted the gendered power dynamics and also changed policies to include the needs of all constituents, men, women, and children. Later on, Rangel would stay into office until she passed away in 2003. But one major policy, aside from welfare and local policies that she did for her county, at the state level, she's really known for helping usher in the top 10% plan that combats the legacy programs found at major top universities here in the state. This top 10% plan was created to help students of color and especially especially students that are white from the working class, to have a chance to enter the top flagship universities in Texas, such as UT and A&M, because as research found when they were formulating the top 10% plan is that many of these students, students of color, and students that were from the working poor background were being discriminated against by admission administrators. So this, kind of created an equalizer to not just the legacy program found at top universities, but an entry for these students. Now I want to shift gears to talk about another woman that I talk about in my essay, and that's Maria Cárdenas out of San Angelo. Maria Cárdenas, she was the first Chicana politician of San Angelo in Texas, and her stance is also assisted in promoting progressive women in electoral politics. Much of the historical record when we talk about the Texas Chicano movement has centered on Central or South Texas. And so in our work, I show that San Angelo and other West Texas towns remain on the periphery for histories on the Chicano movement in Texas politics. Cárdenas' experience with the movement delivers a critical discussion on how Chicanas can continue to challenge party politics for the advancement of women's rights, voting power, and the Latino community from different regions across Texas. Cárdenas was active with La Raza Unida Party and attended meetings that promoted Chicanas and political organizations, such as with her attendance to the 1973 National Women's meeting in Houston that I spoke about earlier. And here at the center is a newspaper clipping. The center picture is of Cárdenas that announced that she was the Raza Unida Party delegate for Tom Green County of San Angelo. As a San Angelo resident, Cárdenas gained recognition for her public agenda for speaking out against discrimination and political inequality in the area. She used San Angelo's newspaper to voice her opinions about politics and often debated residents about their views on issues in the paper. Her use of the local newspaper provided her with the ability to build community and social networks to advance her stances in San Angelo. And of course, her activism stretched beyond the local to the state. At the height of the Raza Unida Party, Cárdenas attended political development conferences across the state. In 1971, at the state convention in San Antonio, found in records in the archive, Cárdenas ran against Alma Canales for the state committee woman position, but despite her loss for the seat, she continued to participate in the Raza Unida Party. She was also involved in Mujeres por la Raza in the program of the 1973 Conferencia de Mujeres por la Raza Unida. Cárdenas was named as a workshop facilitator for the panel titled Cómo organizar en pueblos rurales and semi-rurales, alongside Elena Diaz and Diana Sedna. In the same way, in similar ways to Irma Rangel's pathway to public office, Cárdenas' participation in the Raza Unida Party, local politics, and the Texas Women's Political Caucus provided her support and the networks to grow and invoke change within her own city of San Angelo. In 1975, Cárdenas launched a campaign to change San Angelo's electoral voting system from an at-large representation to single-member districts. At the time, during this time when she launched this campaign, the city was running under an at-large representation. That means city council commissioners from at-large districts represented a particular region with unequal population districts, which in turn created inequity in resources and disempowered minority districts. Single-member districts would remedy the lack of representation at City Hall because population numbers would make up the districts and representatives had to live in the district they sought to represent. So Cárdenas' campaign for single-member district caught the attention of local San Angelo residents, the community's Democratic Club, the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, and she built power with people who shared similar problems and concerns. The single-member district campaign allowed for the creation of alliances that crossed race, class, and gender. And on April 3rd, 1976, the city held an election to vote the restructuring of the electoral system from at-large to single-member districts. And the vote passed by a margin of 1,300 votes. And it would go into effect, that means going from at-large to single-member district. and they would have to vote on new single-member council representatives in 1978. That meant that during this time, from the lull between it going from the vote to then voting into new council members, Cardenas got her wheels turning because by January 1978, she announced her bid for District 3 that encompassed the Rio Vista neighborhood, predominantly Chicano neighborhood from which she resided. Here I have a picture of her on the top right-hand corner of her campaign ad that she posted in the local newspaper. On April 2nd, 1978, Maria Cardenas and Mary Burke from District 1 found themselves in a runoff against their opponent. On May 13th, the San Angelo Standard Times announced, quote, historic single-member district seats, election seats, 2 women, end quote. Mary Burke and Cardenas had won their runoff against their competitors. Winning a seat at City Hall allowed Cardenas to strengthen her rights as a Chicana by participating in the decision-making process that wielded power in her town. Cardenas served as District 3's council member from 1978 to 1983. While in office, Cardenas pushed for improvements in the district such as street paving, healthcare clinics, street light fixtures, and for the funneling of monetary resources to her neighborhood. And in 1980, a survey dubbed Cardenas as one of the most powerful people in San Angelo. She was the only woman to receive this recognition alongside 24 men. She also served as pro tem mayor during the 1982 to 1983 term. Cardenas left city politics when she lost her bid for Tom Green County Commissioner seat in 1983. And she continued to funnel her political skills into local organizations until her passing in 1993. In November 2001, the town of San Angelo dedicated a pedestrian bridge in the Rio Vista neighborhood in her honor. She had advocated for the building of a pedestrian bridge when she was alive and in office due to residents being struck by cars. And although the dedication of the bridge happened 8 years after her passing, San Angelo did not fail to forget the staunch leader and politician who brought major transformations to the district she represented. Near the bridge, the city placed a plaque that reads, quote, Ms. Cardenas's inspiration and efforts helped make this bridge a reality. The key to her success was her vision, sincere belief in the voice of the people, perseverance, and devotion to her cause that gained her the respect and admiration of many, end quote. This form of commemoration, as I argue, has allowed for her legacy and for the public memory of her to remain in San Angelo. So, women in politics remembering their place in history. In conclusion, by building a network in local parameters throughout Texas, women established critical systems that allowed Latinas to create a larger civil rights movement to challenge and transform electoral politics for the inclusion of all women. Because Chicanas chose to empower themselves socially, politically, and economically, they no longer accepted the dismissal of their needs and concerns. And this representative justice in electoral politics goes beyond the Chicano movement, and it has a lasting and meaningful effect for women in the Democratic Party. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. That was such a great introduction to a number of women that I hope that we can all get to know and have in our memories of how Mexican Americans have been politicized and been active in communities for decades. I did just want to ask you, when when you've been researching these women and the obstacles that they experienced in not only getting taken seriously, but also then getting elected, do you think that there have been changes so that those obstacles, those challenges to getting elected, have they been resolved, or have they been reduced, or where are we in terms of getting more Mexican American women, or just Latinas in general, into elected positions?
That's such a brilliant question, because I haven't been asked that before about the changes. So I think during this time when Chicanas are moving their engines to be more public facing in the political realm, right? The issues, stereotypes that I write in my book, right? The stereotypes of, I calladitas son más bonitas, right? Don't get involved, right? And the stereotypes from the larger public, right? Mexican American are docile, very respectful, not involved in political work. But we know historically every act is political work, whether it be in labor or in the home, but it's how it's perceived in the public. And I think perhaps little stereotypes and perhaps dealing with community ideas of where women, community as in Latino or Mexican American or Chicano community, what are women's role? And I think that's progressed because of the women involved on that side of the party, right? Women have shown that they do belong in this system, but there's still work to be done. I think overarchingly what is the fruit of what women did during the movement era is the networks that they created, but also the networks and organizations that they've developed to funnel and help women run for public office. The resources, not just the knowledge, but monetary resources that they've created that has inspired other organizations and other Latinas to create other organizations at the local and state level and across the nation. And that's part of one. And I think what I really want to show within my book, and what I, hopefully I showed within this anthology chapter, is that when we understand Latinas today running for public office, a lot of their breakthroughs is because of the work that Chicanas, have done during this era to combat racism and sexism and classism, right? But I think we still, in the current day, I think Latinas, Chicanas, Mexican American women still deal with having that monetary support, but overarchingly they still deal with gerrymandering in their communities. So I mean, it's all it takes so much more work, and it unfortunately the Texas political power structure gets more savvy with their movidas of how to make sure not just women, but also overarchingly people of color to be directly involved with the democratic process.
Yeah,
That was long-winded.
Yeah, no, but I mean, it does make me think. I'm just thinking of that quote that you had from Marta Cordera about, there's no Mexican American female representation at this level, at this level, at this level, at this level. And it's still in some cases true. But I will say, as you mentioned about the single member district challenge that, or I'm sorry, the at large that a lot of cities had, that was then shifted in some places largely thanks to Mexican American activism. I'm thinking of, somebody like Rosie Castro, who worked to end single member districts in San Antonio and others too. But for example, in San Antonio, when they got rid of the at large and moved to single member districts, we were able then to get to a place where, and it took decades, but just with a few years ago, we finally saw a Mexican American female majority city council. And again, it took a few decades, but it had to do with shifting, well, how our city council members elected, and Mexican American women played a role in making that happen. I yeah. I guess just one other question would be, um, you have a project after this one specifically on Irma Rangel. Can you maybe just say a little bit more about her in terms of what makes her particularly a compelling subject?
Yeah, I mean, first, I mean, I've learned from the historians that that have been writing about biographies, right? And I think about Cynthia Orozco right now because I just interviewed her for Alonso Perales, right? How biographies are so important and how we have very little on Latinos, Mexican American political activism. It still needs to, we need more of it. And so that's one grain of why I think it's so important to have Imara, because she is the first Mexican American woman, first Chicana to be in the state house representative. But more in large, I think if we look at her initiatives of what she did in public office, welfare reform, but also looking at what I mentioned earlier, the top 10% plan, it really puts Texas into a larger perspective when we think about legacy programs and issues about affirmative action, because we often don't think as Texas as a place for policy change or law change within the educational realm. We often think of Michigan, with the University of Michigan in that case out there. But when we focus and look at the life of Irma Rangel, that allows me to bring that discussion to Texas and look how it was pioneered here, not just by male politicians, but by a woman Chicana politician with the assistance and of her brain trust, as she called, of UT professors. And those implications to dismantle racism within the structural racism within politics and in government.
We do have an audience question about culture and the impact of culture. This question is, have you found being a Latina woman, it's harder for her because her culture has a hard time accepting being vocal or assertive?
Have I found being a Latina, me as a
Well,
Latina?
I think she means for Latina politicians that there's a cultural maybe element that women are not the more assertive or more vocal members of society, and so maybe that has been a challenge for women wanting to break into politics.
Yeah, I think there, as a historian looking at, the change over time, right? And when I writing about the women from the 1970s, right? That's what they're going up against, right? Even with women that in the party and these stereotypes that I mentioned earlier. But that is all part of socialization, also that goes within the community and the family, of how women have been. Most women, or some women, have been socialized to view themselves in one particular way, right? But historically, that changed during the 60s and 70s, with women being more direct with leadership and taking over. They're changing that socialization process, and there is change. That's some of the change that happens over time. Now today, I mean, I think it's still an ongoing process, but now at least there's more literature, right? That Latinas can show and be like, hey, there's a historical legacy here. And I think one document that that Chicanas used in the 1970s, of course, is Marta Cortera's book, Dios se Yembra. That was really like a shifting of the gaze and be like, we have this history. It's now that we need to document it and put it out there to show that we have been leaders and feminism is part of Chicana history.
Right.
So I think that's what they were, battling with during that time. And today, I think it's an ongoing project of socialization, but at least using the knowledge we have as tools to combat that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're at the end of the hour, so I want to thank you, Dr. Gonzalez, for sharing all this knowledge with us. I think we learned a lot about women who have been working within the system to get into politics, and these are names that we should know, right? These are if we grew up knowing who Henry B. Gonzalez was, we should know who Marta Cortera is too. So I want to thank everybody who joined us tonight. I also want to thank AARP for sponsoring tonight's talk. Thank you, AARP. If you liked tonight's presentation, I encourage you to learn more about MACRI at somosmacri.org. We regularly host virtual talks like tonight's. And in fact, next week on Tuesday, I hope you will join us. We have another talk coming up Tuesday, same time, same place, learning about Mexican American civil rights sites series. This topic is going to focus on Rio Vista Farm in Socorro. This is just outside of El Paso. It's the last standing bracero processing site in the United States. So this is where hundreds, if not thousands, of laborers from Mexico were processed when they were brought into the United States for part of the bracero program. And there are now efforts to preserve that site and turn it into a museum. So we'll be learning about that next Tuesday.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. I hope everybody has a great night. I hope we'll see you again at a future MACRI talk. Have a good night, everybody.